Welcome back guys to another tutorial. I am really excited about this one. We are going to be sewing the Isabel top. I am literally so obsessed with how she came out, and you guys on Instagram have also been loving her, so I'm super happy about that and so grateful. She does come in both a short sleeve and a long sleeve option, and she has these welt pockets which can be a little bit more complicated if you've never sewn one before, but these are also completely optional, so you can just like leave them out. I thought they were a nice option to have for anyone who wanted to make a long sleeve kind of jacket version. This white one, it has been made out of a kind of a heavy-ish denim twill, but the reason I mention it is because at the end of the video I am going to be showing you some of the changes that I would make if you are wanting to make more of a blouse version. Anyways, enough chatting from me. Let's begin. Let's start with everything you'll need. First of all, we are going to need some hand sewing needles. This is for the buttons as well as to stitch the facing down at the very end. And this is optional. This is just to mark the pockets through the pattern, but you can use anything. Like you can just use a fabric pen and like make a hole in the pattern if you want. And the last piece of equipment is an overlock. You can probably get away with overcasting on your regular sewing machine, but of course the overlocker is going to be neater. For fabric, I have this white and brown twill. They are both about 250 GSM, but the brown is much stiffer, and you can kind of see that in the photos. The recommended weight for this pattern is about 200 to 300 GSM. You will also need a tiny piece of lining. This is just for the pocket bag. Depending on your self fabric, you might be able to get away with using that. Otherwise, a lining is recommended. You'll also need a very small amount of fusible interfacing. This is just for the collar and the pockets. Just make sure that it is the same weight or lighter than your fabric. Next, you'll need some thread, some to match the fabric, and optionally a contrasting color for the top stitching as well. A couple of buttons. The ones I have here are about 23 millimeters. Now it's time to actually do the thing. Firstly, you want to cut your pieces onto your chosen self and lining fabric, following the instructions on the pieces and within the file. Leave the interfacing pieces for now, as we will cut them as we go. I'm going to show you how to do the welt pocket first. They are entirely optional, and it does add about an hour or two onto the entire project. So if you don't want to do them, just skip to the next section. First, you want to cut 4 2cm by 13cm rectangles in interfacing for the pocket flaps as well as the pocket backs. Mark the location of the welt pocket onto the front bottom piece using an awl or a fabric pen. Use the awl to mark the corners and then the fabric pen to connect the dots. You want to mark both sides. Iron the fusing onto the back of the pocket openings directly over and central to the markings you made. Iron the fusing onto the back of the pocket flaps to one side. Fold the fused pocket flaps in half with the right side out. In the sample, I added the decorative stitches at this point. The interfacing might cover the markings you did for the pocket position, so just remark those on top of the interfacing. From the front, line up the pocket flap piece and pocket inner wrong side up to the central shorter line. For the pocket flap, the right side is whichever side the interfacing was sewn to. But if you've done the decorative stitching on both sides like I have, it kind of doesn't really matter in the end. You want to make sure it is lined up centrally. Use a ruler to measure if you need to, then pin these pieces in place. Now lay the pocket inner over the pocket flap, also wrong side up. From the back, stitch down the 2 long lines, reversing at both ends to lock the stitch. Try and be as precise as you can with where you are starting and stopping your stitching. Then very carefully cut down the central line without cutting any of the pocket pieces. You can cut from either the front or the back, whichever you find easiest. When you get to the ends of the line, cut into the corners as close as you can to the end of your stitched lines. Turn the pocket pieces through the hole and check that it can sit flat. If you find that there is a bit of resistance in the fabric in the corners, you might not have cut close enough into them. Play around with it a little until you can get the pieces to sit flat. Press the pieces into place. To help, you can open up the seam allowances and iron these flat first before pressing flat. Overlock the 2 seams where the pocket pieces attach to the front piece. It is a relatively small seam allowance, so be careful to not sew beyond the initial stitch. You may have to adjust your overlocking width. Understitch the pocket outer to the pocket flap. Place pocket pieces into its final position, turn back the front bottom piece to reveal the 2 triangles at the end of the pocket opening. Stitch these 2 triangles into place. Finally, close the pocket bag around the edges. Start from one of the triangles, go around the pocket and finish at the other. Overlock around the entire pocket bag, including the straight edge. Your pocket should now be functional and complete. Follow the same steps for the other pocket. Now we are going to move on to the front pieces. Pin the pleat at the front bottom piece into place. Take the front top piece and place it right sides together onto the front bottom piece. Stitch together the 2 pieces along the top edge. Press the seam open before pressing upwards. This ensures a much closer press to the stitch line. Overlock this seam as well as the shoulder and side seam. Top stitch the seam connecting the front top and front bottom. Repeat these steps for the other front piece, then place these pieces to the side. Now working on the back, take your back piece and pin the pleat at the center back into place. Place the yoke right sides together onto the back piece and sew along that top edge. Once again, press the seam open and upwards. Overlock this seam as well as the side and shoulder seams. Top stitch the seam connecting the yoke to the back. Place this to the side. Now we are working on the collar. Cut fusing for the top collar piece number 7. Use the pattern to cut this out. Iron the fusing onto the back of the top collar. I did cut the interfacing slightly smaller than the actual piece, but then later on I realized that was kind of redundant, so just ignore that part. Place the top collar and under collar right sides together and sew along the curved edge, leaving the straight edge open. The top collar is a few millimeters larger than the under collar. This is intentional. Try and match up the notches and the edges as close as possible. Trim down the seam allowance by about half and cut some triangles into the curved edge to reduce bulk. Turn the collar inside out and press flat. I find it creates a neater edge if you press the seam allowance open first. Top stitch the collar around the curved edge. I've also decided to do the decorative stitching around the collar at this point. Place this piece to the side. Next, it's the facing. Overlock the 2 short edges on the front facing and back facing before sewing them right sides together. Press the seam open. Overlock all the way around the outside of the facing pieces. Once again, place this to the side. Now that we have completed all of the individual parts, we are going to be assembling it all together. Take your front and back pieces and connect them at the shoulder seam. The back shoulder seam is slightly longer, so ease it into the front shoulder seam. Press the seam open. Pin the straight edge of the collar so both pieces are lined up. As mentioned before, the under collar is slightly smaller, so it has a tendency to sit 2 millimeters shorter than the top collar. After pinning, sew the collar onto the right side of the front and back pieces. Make sure the top collar piece, which is the one that is interfaced, is on top. There are 2 notches at the center front. The collar should match up to the one that is the furthest away from the front edge. Use a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. Here in the video, I forgot to do it at a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. If it looks like I'm doing the wrong seam allowance, it's because it is. Pin the facing on top of the collar, wrong side up, and over the front pieces. Start sewing from the hem of the facing, and in one stitch, sew all the way around the garment, across the collar and down to the other side. Cut the 4 corners of the facing and trim down the top edge where the collar sits to about 0.7 centimeters. It does not need to be precise, but do not trim into the stitches. You also don't want to go too short because we will have to run this section through the overlocker. You may also need to trim some slits into the part with the collar if your fabric is particularly stiff or thick. Sew the side seams and press open. Overlock around the entire perimeter of your garment. Iron the hem by folding up 1 centimeter and top stitch it from the center front piece all the way to the other center front piece. Turn the facing right side out, make sure all the corners are sitting flat and the collar sits comfortably. Understitch the two center front edges as well as just under the collar. Open up the fabric and get as close as possible to the corners as your machine can comfortably get. It doesn't really matter if you can't go that close into the corners. You want to understitch the center front edges so that the seam allowance sits towards the facing. When understitching the facing around the collar, push the seam allowance towards the facing and keep the collar out of the way. Iron the facing into place. This is what your piece should look like at this stage. Now we are going to be moving on to the sleeves. I'm going to be starting on the cap sleeve, so skip this section if you are wanting to sew the full sleeve. Overlock the hem of the sleeve, fold it up by 1 centimeter and top stitch. If you want to do the decorative stitching, this is where I did mine. Pleat a box pleat at the top of the sleeve and stitch into place using a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. Pin the sleeve into place, match up the notches connecting it to the shoulder seam and bodice pieces. The double notch matches up to the back bodice and the single notch matches up to the front. Distribute the ease evenly and pin before you sew. Sew the sleeves into place without any puckering. I find that sewing with the sleeve piece, which is the longer side, against the teeth of the machine helps to ease it in. Cut small slits into the bottom of the armhole so that the edge can be folded over. Overlock around the entire armhole, fold over the edge that is not connected to the sleeve and top stitch. Finally press the armhole seam and this is what your sleeve should look like. Here is how you sew the full sleeve. Skip this section if you did the cap sleeve. Overlock the left and right edge of the full sleeve, fold the sleeve right sides together to sew together the sleeve seam and press the seam open. Pin the sleeve into the armhole, match up the notches connecting it to the shoulder seam and bodice pieces. The double notch matches up to the back bodice and the single notch matches up to the front. Distribute the ease evenly along the cap of the sleeve. The bottom of the armhole should not have any ease. Then sew the sleeve into place without any puckering. Overlock the armhole and give it a press. This is the first time I'm trying on the long sleeve. The sleeves are so long. I'll probably have to adjust the pattern so that by the time it's out, the default length should probably be like this side. Either way, whenever I make something new, I still prefer not hemming it until after I've tried it on. It just gives you more room to change anything. To finish the sleeve, just overlock the hem, then fold it up by 1 centimeter and top stitch in place. Once again, I chose to add the decorative stitches here. Now we have made it to the final part, which is the buttons and the finishing touches. Pin the front of your top so that the space between the collar piece is 2 centimeters. Line up the horizontal seam at the front of your garment. Place your buttons in the position that you want them and mark the position. I like to mark the top, bottom, left and right, then use these markings to mark out the buttonhole placement. As you can see in this tiny illustration, the buttons will have a tendency to sit on the right of the buttonhole, so take that into consideration when you are placing your buttonhole. Sew your buttonholes either with a sewing machine or by hand and cut them open. Once again, pin the front piece back into place so that there is a 2 centimeter gap between the collar. Use a fabric marker or tool of choice and mark the position of your button through the buttonholes. Hand stitch your buttons onto the markings. Hand stitch the facing piece to the bodice pieces at the shoulder seams as well as the seam connecting the front top to the front bottom. This just keeps it from flapping outwards. And that was the last step. We are done. Congratulations, you have just completed the Isabel top. Before we move on to the final section of the video, I just wanted to read you some notes that I got throughout the testing period. Also, I do apologize for the indoor lighting. It's literally not even 5 p.m. and it's pitch black outside. So a couple of the testers did give me feedback that the armhole is a little bit tight. Looking at some of the photos of the cap sleeve, I personally don't think I want to be showing more of my armpit, so I left that as is. But if you know that you have a slightly bigger arm proportional to your body, I would say lower it by about 1 centimeter and you should be fine. If you are sewing the full sleeve, you will also have to adjust the sleeve width a little bit to match the new armhole. But if you're sewing the cap sleeve, you should be fine to just keep that as it is. I also had someone suggest that it might be easier if you stitch the pleats first, kind of like how I did with the top of the cap sleeve with the front and the back, because in the tutorial I just do it all in one step. Next piece of feedback is the top is quite cropped. It is something to think about, and it's very simple to just lengthen it from on the front and the back. But if you have a bigger bust, it will lift the hem up even more. That's also potentially something you might want to consider. Another person said that the pockets are kind of useless, and you know what, they're not wrong. They are kind of useless, and you can see the pocket bag peeking out from under it because the top is so cropped. I didn't have that much room to lift up the pockets without your arms literally being like this. For some reason, I just like the little extra detail, even if it is just aesthetic and it doesn't really have functional purpose, because you do also risk things falling out. Women's wear barely gets any pockets as it is, so I tried. Another person did say as well that there is an awful amount of overlocking on the inside. For example, for the edge of the facing, I personally don't mind the look of overlocking if it's on the inside and if it's neat. I think one of the testers did decide that they would rather turn that edge over, and another one I noticed did a bias binding around that edge. Super easy to do, so that is an option as well. Yeah, that's all the feedback from my lovely testers, so let's all say thank you to them. Okay, so let's talk about what changes we have to make to the construction in order for it to be more suitable for a lighter fabric. First of all, I did kind of do it on this one, but I didn't think far ahead enough. When you sew a shirt, it's pretty standard that the yoke is double. So you basically tuck the seams under it and in the shoulder seam between the two pieces of the yoke. So I did do that, but I also cut the facing so that the collar would be able to sit between the facing and the yoke, which is kind of overkill. Like, you don't need 3 layers back here. So I've also not done this myself, but I really wanted to get this tutorial out in due time. I would cut another front top piece and sew it to the inner yoke layer so that the top and the yoke are all double layer, and then put the collar into both of those layers, and then that way you can cut a piece of interfacing just for the buttonholes and for where the buttons are, and it would be completely sealed. And then after I would double layer the top front, I would just not cut the facing and then extend the front bottom piece so that I could just have a placket coming from here all the way to the bottom. I hope that makes sense. This part of the video is just a little bit extra. I think that's it from me. I am pretty active on Instagram, so if you want to follow me there, and also I regularly do polls where I get you guys to vote on what the next pattern is. I really love getting the feedback from the community. If you decide to make this, please tag me. Nothing makes me more happy than to see people actually make the garment. It is one of the most fulfilling parts of making patterns, and so please tag me. I want to see it. I think that's it from me today. Thank you so much for watching and for purchasing the pattern if you do or you did. See you next time. 3, 2, 1.